Maybe you're not lazy. Maybe your brain just got so spoiled by instant dopamine that the second life stops acting like a casino, it treats basic effort like torture. And if that's true, the ending of this story changes everything. And once I realized that, a lot of things I used to call lack of discipline started looking more like bad conditioning. Maybe you're not lazy. Maybe your brain learned the wrong standard. A while ago, I noticed something that was honestly hard to admit. I could sit with my phone and move through short videos, messages, tabs, random searches, and low-grade digital junk for far longer than I ever planned to. Not because I loved any one thing that much, but because my brain seemed perfectly happy staying in that stream. One more swipe, one more check, one more tiny hit of novelty. But then I would try to do something slower and more meaningful. Reading, writing, studying, exercising, even planning my week properly. And suddenly, everything felt strangely heavy. Not impossible, just heavier than it should have felt. That bothered me. Because if I really had no focus, then why could I focus so well on stimulation? If I really had no motivation, then why did I have so much of it for things that gave me almost nothing back? That was the first crack in the story I had been telling myself. A lot of self-improvement advice starts by accusing you. Be more disciplined. Stop being lazy. Want it more. And I get why people say that. It sounds strong. It sounds useful. It sounds like the kind of advice that should work. But sometimes it explains nothing. It does not explain why easy rewards feel magnetic, while meaningful work feels emotionally expensive. It does not explain why your attention is alive all day for distractions, then suddenly goes missing the moment the task actually matters. Welcome to Vex Oriss. If this channel helps you think more clearly about your mind, subscribe and stay with me. Because I do not think this conversation starts with discipline. I think it starts with a more uncomfortable question. What if the problem is not that you hate effort? What if your brain has just been trained to expect a completely different kind of reward?
And if that sounds dramatic, the strange part is that the mechanism behind it is not actually that mysterious. Most people hear the word dopamine and translate it into pleasure. That is close enough to spread online, but too shallow to be useful. A better way to think about dopamine is that it helps shape pursuit. It is deeply involved in anticipation, salience, motivation, and reward prediction. In other words, the brain's sense that something is worth moving toward. That matters because it means the real issue is not just what feels good, it's what your brain learns to chase. In modern life is very good at teaching your brain to chase intensity. Short-form video, notifications, hyper-processed food, endless feeds, constant novelty. The internet has become a machine for presenting small rewards with almost no effort required. And the most powerful version of that reward is not even certainty, it's uncertainty. Maybe the next video will be better. Maybe the next notification will matter. Maybe the next refresh will finally bring something interesting enough to justify the last 20. That variable reward pattern is a big part of why the loop becomes sticky. The phone stops feeling like a tool and starts behaving like a tiny slot machine that happens to know your name. Now here's where the misunderstanding gets expensive. When your brain spends enough time in high stimulation, low effort loops, slower rewards start losing emotional contrast. Reading a few pages feels flat. Studying feels unusually hard to enter. Exercise feels negotiable. Deep work feels like it costs more than it used to. Not because those things lost their value, but because your internal standard for interesting enough to pursue got pushed in the wrong direction. This is the broad intuition behind what people casually call dopamine tolerance or an overstimulated reward system, even though the science is more complex than content creators usually make it sound. And I want to be fair here. Not every focus problem is dopamine. Sometimes it's poor sleep, chronic stress, anxiety, depression, ADHD, burnout. A mind cannot be reduced to one chemical and a catchy thumbnail. That would be fake depth. But I do think a lot of people underestimate how much daily overstimulation quietly changes what effort feels like, which is why just be disciplined often lands badly. It treats the struggle like a moral failure when sometimes it's closer to a training problem. It assumes your brain is responding to a neutral environment, when in reality that environment may be shaping your cravings all day. So the better question is no longer, why am I like this? It becomes, what has my brain been practicing wanting?
And once I started asking that question, The idea of a dopamine reset stopped sounding trendy and started sounding practical. I should say this clearly. Dopamine reset is mostly a practical phrase, not a strict scientific term. I am not talking about pressing a magic button in your nervous system and returning the factory settings. That is not how brains work. What I mean is something simpler and more honest, temporarily reducing high stimulation input so your attention can stop being pulled in 10 directions at once, and ordinary effort can start feeling reachable again. That difference matters because a lot of people make this concept theatrical. They imagine a reset means becoming joyless, extreme, anti-technology, or weirdly proud of suffering. But the point is not to prove how little fun you can have. The point is to lower the volume long enough to hear your own mind again. I remember one evening that made this painfully obvious to me. I had spent the day drifting between messages, clips, music, snacks, and background noise. Nothing dramatic, nothing obviously destructive, just a constant drip of easy stimulation. By the time I finally sat down to read something that actually mattered to me, I lasted maybe a few minutes before my brain started bargaining. Check your phone once, put on some music, open another tab, do literally anything except stay here. That moment felt small, but it was revealing, because the issue was not that I suddenly stopped caring about my future. The issue was that my brain had been fed so much frictionless reward that silence itself started feeling like deprivation. That is why boredom matters more than people think. Boredom is not always a bug in this process. Sometimes it is the bridge. Sometimes it is the nervous system complaining because it is no longer being entertained every few seconds. And if you can sit through that stage without immediately escaping it, something starts changing. A walk feels less empty. A page feels less hostile. Your thoughts stop sounding like background static. Practically, there are two ways to approach this. The first is a harder reset day. For one day, reduce the major high-stimulation inputs as much as reasonably possible. Endless scrolling, unnecessary internet use, junk food, constant noise, compulsive checking, maybe other habits you already know leave your brain scattered afterward. Replace them with lower stimulation activities: walking, journaling, reading, quiet reflection, writing by hand, being outside, doing one thing at a time. That structure is very close to the practical routine in the original script you base this on. The second is lighter and often easier to sustain. Choose one high dopamine behavior and remove it for one full day each week. One behavior, one day, not a grand declaration of self-purification. Just enough to create contrast again. That too stays close to the original framework. Pick one high-stimulation habit, cut it for a day, let boredom redirect you toward neglected low-stimulation tasks. And this is why the old method fails. A lot of people try to build focus without reducing stimulation first. They keep the same reward environment, then blame themselves when meaningful work still feels dull by comparison. That is not always a discipline problem. Sometimes it is just an environment problem wearing a discipline costume.
And once you lower the noise a little, the next pattern becomes much easier to see. A lot of us are placing reward in exactly the wrong position. We stimulate ourselves first, then expect effort to feel appealing afterward. We scroll before studying, snack before working, bounce through easy pleasure before asking the brain to do something slow, uncertain, and valuable. Then we act surprised when the harder task feels unbearable by comparison. But sequence matters. One of the most useful ideas in the original script was also one of the simplest. Put the reward after the effort, not before it. Use high dopamine activities as a reward for difficult work, not as the appetizer that ruins your appetite for it. The original example was concrete. Roughly 1 hour of low dopamine work for 15 minutes of high dopamine reward later in the day. That ratio can change, but the logic is solid. This is not about turning yourself into a machine. It is about retraining association. If reward comes first, effort feels like the annoying thing standing between you and relief. If reward comes after, effort begins to feel like the path that leads somewhere. Your brain starts learning a different order. So make it real. Read first, then scroll. Work first, then watch. Train first, then relax. Write first, then disappear into the internet. Not because pleasure is bad, because timing changes meaning. And one more thing, not every reward is a good reward. If something is genuinely harming your health or deepening compulsive behavior, do not package it as self-care with better branding. Choose a reward that still feels good without undoing the point.
The original script makes the same caution clearly. If the behavior is damaging, do not use it as the reward. And if addiction is serious, professional help matters. So maybe the deeper lesson is this: you do not always need more force. Sometimes you need a better loop. What stays with me most is not the idea that people are weak. It is the idea that people are often trying to build a meaningful life inside systems that train the mind to prefer what is immediate, loud, and effortless. If you live inside that long enough, hard things really can start feeling harsher than they are. So the lesson is not hate pleasure. It is be careful what your brain learns to expect. If you want to apply this in real life, start small and make it specific. Pick one source of overstimulation and remove it for one day this week. Or choose one rule for the next 7 days. Effort first, reward second. That is enough to reveal a lot. Not all at once, not magically, but honestly. And if you want, tell me this in the comments. What is one habit you think has been quietly training your brain in the wrong direction? If this channel helps you think more clearly about your life, subscribe to Vex Oriss. That support really does help me keep making better videos.